When reviewing the new NFPA 1900 standard, it's important to note that the standard stresses the importance of lighting and scene visibility. Similarly, the Emergency Responder Safety Institute reports that 65 roadway responders were struck and killed by vehicles in 2021, and another 51 died in 2022. Today, scene visibility is more vital than ever. Learn how Command Light elevates, rotates, and clusters valuable light with its light towers and equips apparatus with traffic advisors at commandlight.com.
The Fire Store, equipping protectors with passion. Every decision the Fire Store makes as a company is about you, the customer. The Fire Store wouldn't be where it is today without you, and the company doesn't take that lightly. It understands that having the right gear can mean the difference between life and death. The Fire Store's goal is to get you the gear you need, when you need it, at prices you can afford. Visit thefirestore.com for everything but the truck and shop a family of brands that include Streamlight, MSA, Lion, FLIR, and more. Hi, Chris McLoone here with Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment. Welcome to this edition of or episode of our podcast. What I'm going to be talking about today with these two gentlemen is an NFPA 1900. For those who don't know, we did enter a revision cycle a few years back for NFPA 1901, which is the standard for automotive fire apparatus. What NFPA 1900 has done has combined a number of apparatus standards, including the Wildland standard, the ARF apparatus standard, and the ambulance standard. We're going to focus on the apparatus side of this, the structural firefighting apparatus. With me today is Bill Peters. He is a retired battalion chief from the Jersey City, New Jersey Fire Department. He was in charge of the fleet there. And Deputy Chief Ed Rice from the Washington, D.C. Fire Department, or DCFD. He is in charge of their fleet there. These two gentlemen also were members of the committee that sorted through thousands of public comments on the standard when they originally started the revision. They were caught off guard a little bit. It started as a regular revision process, but then the NFPA decided to combine all these standards together. Guys, thank you very much for joining me today. Bill, please try to control yourself about the yellow helmet behind me. I know it's not one of your favorite styles, but I do have a white one that might be more to your liking. But we're here to talk about fire trucks today. Okay. And just so everyone knows, this is not only on the apparatus side. We're not going to get into it too much today, but NFPA is also combining a number of other standards. For example, the helmet and the PPE and SCBA, I believe they're all being combined. So, this is not only happening with the fire apparatus standard. Also, my hope is that after today, after we discuss some of the things about this standard, that there will be questions from our audience. If you would like, and we are going to have a follow-up, kind of a part 2 to this in December. So I hope that if you do have questions, you'll let me know. Chris.McLoone, MCLOONE at Clarion Events. That's CLARION events.com. And what we'll do is we'll collect all the questions and we will get as many answered in our second edition as we can. So, fellas, thank you again very much for joining me today. Ed, I'm going to start with you, and then Bill, join in. You were both on this committee that put together NFPA 1900. So could you talk a little bit about, from your perspective, not only as a committee member, but also as an end user, what some of the more significant changes, what some of the most significant changes to you are between NFPA 1900 and the most recent revision of NFPA 1901. Ed, I'll start with you.
Probably like the biggest thing that people are probably going to stand out and take notice of is the chevron striping on the rear was always a very large, questionable topic. It didn't matter whether it was a career department, a volunteer department, whatever, in reference to the contrasting colors and the colors were dictated before. So now there's flexibility as long as the colors are contrasting, but it's also recommended about the red and the yellow, green, and the amber colors to stick with that. But there is flexibility, and that was probably the majority of the exceptions that were signed off on for departments when they were making a purchase. There's some seating changes that came into play. There's some lighting changes. The seating changes will probably have a real huge impact, as it'll affect seating in cabs based on the interior cab widths and whatnot for interior spacing, in particular across the rear wall, as well as between engine tunnels. So they're two of the bigger ones. And then the seating also, it went into tiller cages for tractor drawn aerials. There was concern raised about there was tiller training seats that were being used, and they were using a trailer hitch and sliding a seat into a trailer hitch, and it was on the exterior of the tiller cage. And I still think this is, if somebody's going to require a training area for somebody to be back there with a tillerman where they don't have the ability to use a driving course or a large parking area, it's going to be problematic because the tiller cage is going to be much wider, and the tiller person is going to have to be sliding pretty much a little bit to the left and the right to get their visibility. They're not going to be in a tighter confined area where they can just lean to the left or lean to the right to be able to get a visual on the left and right sides of the trailer. They're probably the two bigger ones that stand out to me, the seating and the striping. Lighting is also going to have a little bit of changes as far as you're going to see these DVI systems, and some of the manufacturers have come out with computer programming now, where their lighting systems are programmed by what switches you select. So there's going to be some interesting things happen with those three areas, and that they're always big topics, it seems.
Bill, how about you?
Of course, I agree with Ed on all of those items. The chevron striping thing was always something that I brought up. You know, guys sign off on a statement of exception. Now, don't forget, 1900 don't come into play till the first of the year, which is only a couple of months away. But people have been buying fire trucks with different striping on the back and signing off on a statement of exception. That lets the manufacturer off the hook. So if you decide that you want pink and green stripes on the back of your rig, and somebody plows into the back of it and says that they didn't see it, you might have a problem defending that. But another big item was that all of the equipment has been taken out of the standard. All of the loose equipment that used to be required, that said before the apparatus is placed in services shall have all of this, that was all taken out and moved to the annex. So the annex has a chart that has the equipment listed, and then across the top would be proper aerial, special service, and so forth. And you go down the chart, and then it'll be what is suggested to be carried. The other thing was that for many years, ground ladders had to be supplied new by the manufacturer, or either suction hose or supply hose. That was something that Bob Bearclaw fought for years, and finally got in there because his thought was, you know, you're going to get a new rig and a bunch of old ground ladders, but now that's going to be allowed. So it said, the standard says basically, as long as the ground ladders have been tested and they're okay, they can be used. And I think one of the other things that people are going to find is all of the redundant and non-required stuff has been taken out. For instance, the standard said that you had to have a muffler, for instance. Well, now all diesel engines have, the EPA required treatment systems and so forth. So, a muffler is no longer required. It's all part of the EPA system. So that's out. Things that the manufacturer normally supplies, oil filters, fuel filters, things like that. That's not necessary to be in the standard. That's, it's what the engine manufacturer requires, and typically they're supplying it as well. So there was a lot of that stuff was taken out. So basically those are the big heavy hitters.
I want to get into how the new standard is organized, because there are some slight differences that might be a little might take some getting used to as you're going through and designing your new rig and trying to make sure it's compliant. But you brought up the annex, and I just want to, I guess, clarify what the difference between the annex and the standard is. I'm not. Hopefully everyone understands, but for those who might not realize it, Bill, could you real quick, and then Ed, I'll throw it over to you. Could you just go through standard versus annex? What is the main difference there?
Okay, things that are in the body of the standard are required. If you're doing an NFPA compliant apparatus, it needs to comply with the body of the standard. The annex is the explanation of things that are in the standard. So if you're going through the standard and you see a little asterisk by a paragraph, that tells you to go back to Annex A, and there might be extra material. So, for instance, if let's say something like something with lighting, if you see the asterisk and you go in the back, it explains the whole lighting situation and what you might do and what you might want to do. The other thing, there are other annex items, charts and things like that to assist you when you're doing, for instance, your factory inspection and things like that. Reminders as to what to look for.
Ed, do you have anything else to say to that? And also, could you just get into some of the organization of the standard, and
Sure.
where there might be some areas that aren't confusing but are different than what we've been accustomed to in the standard?
So sure, all the annexes start out with a little definition, and I'll just read it so it's kind of clear. So for the first annex, it's Annex A. It says Annex A is not a part of the requirements of this NFPA document, but is included for informational purposes only. The annex contains explanatory material numbered to correspond with the applicable text paragraphs, which Bill was referring to. Anytime you see that throughout the document, it tells you where to reference the annex, and the numbers correspond. The document was separated into sections. So chapters 1 to 3 are basically general information, definitions, and so forth that kind of describe the document in the NFPA. Chapters 4 to 6 are the R414 standards. Chapters 7 to 27 are 1901 and 1906. Chapters 28 to 34 is the ambulance standard, which is 1917. And then there's annexes A to I, and then an index at the end. So it's a pretty lengthy document. I think it's pages are up to 375 plus some information behind that. So it's a pretty thick document. I think it can be a little confusing when you first try and read it and digest the information that's there, just the way it transitions from ARF to structural and wildland, and then to the ambulances. And then when you're in between structural and wildland, the 1901 and 1906 area, there's some chapters and sections in there where it might just be specific to 1906, and then it goes to something from 1901. So you really have to pay attention to what you're reading. So that's going to be a little bit confusing for people at first until they get used to the document.
So I wanted to go back real quick just to the ground ladder part, Bill. What, if any, documentation is the standard requiring to provide if you decide not to purchase new ladders with the new rig?
It just says that they have to meet the ladder test standard. I guess it was 1931 at the time. I'm not quite sure, but I don't think you have to go and hand in any special documentation. It's just that it's up to you that the ladders be tested so that they're secure. There's two sides to this. Number one is, you might have ladders that are 25 years old off your rig that you want to switch over. And then there are some that said, we do ladder testing routinely and we've replaced, 3 of our ladders last year and, we want to continue using them. So that was the rationale behind that. The other thing, Chris, I wanted to get into real quick was the effective date. So the effective date of the new standard 1900 is January 1st, 2024. There were a lot of people who were thrown a curveball because in the front of the standard, it was approved in, I don't know if it was October of 2022 or something. And the way the wording is, it says effective October 2022, 1900. And, purchasers had brought this up to me at FDIC. Well, which is it? And I said, no, the effective date that it says out in the front is January 1st, 2024. So we're still in 1901 up till now. And then also there's nothing, it says there's nothing to prevent you from using 1900 if both the purchaser and the supplier both agree. So that was kind of a big deal.
Speaking of that, we're talking about some of the differences, and one of the things is, so we got the chevron. I mean, basically that's going to be you can pick the colors that you want. Now,
highly contrasting colors, whatever that means.
Contrasting is the key word there. It's kind of open to interpretation.
Sure.
But I think one of the, we talked a little bit about lighting, but I think one of the things, I want to get a feel from both of you just about what kind of impact some of these changes are going to have on how you specify your next apparatus. And I think one of the big parts of that is going to be the seating. It was the seating stuff has been going on for years. There have been studies done on the size of firefighters. I think it all started with, trying to get guys to use their seatbelts more. And then once we started to really look into it, well, the fact was the clip was too far down. They were having trouble moving around to the back. Bill, I almost knocked your helmet over. We were, that's kind of where it started, and then some other things came in, and there is an impact. And when you get into it, you have primary seating, you have secondary seating now, but the primary seating, I think, is where people are going to see a difference. Ed, could you take me through some of this, just a few more specifics about what's happening with the seating end of things? And Bill, of course, chime in whenever you need to.
So there was a study done that was called an anthropomorphic study, and it was based on the average
Thank
size
God Ed
of a
said
firefighter.
that, because I couldn't say that. That's not in the New Jersey vocabulary.
Year, and the amount of space that the individual would take up seating widths. So, and there's a huge impact with tilt cabs for the driver and officer. with the engine being between them. And that's how they got into primary and secondary seating. And there's different shoulder widths. It's shoulder width. I think the primary seat is 27 and 0.6 or maybe something like that, but it's very close to 28 inches. And I think the hip width is in the 22-inch range, but don't quote me on that, just off the top of my head. And then the secondary seat is narrower in the shoulders and slightly narrower at the hips. And where some of that was driven by cab width interiors on the rear wall of a cab facing forward. If you wanted 3 primary SCBA seats, that would be the maximum you could typically put there based on the spacing that was required with the seats, as well as having the seat belts and the stalks and whatnot. And a lot of that originated, like you pointed out, Chris, from seat belt problems and getting people to wear seat belts. And it started with the length of the seat belt on the pull, as you were describing, as well as the stalk to clip the seat belt into. And there were issues with different size people with the stalks being able to telescope out from underneath the seat belt in any kind of impact. So everything kind of got merged together here, the seat belts and the seats, and put together to try and resolve that issue as best as possible. But that's where a lot of this was driven from. The seating is, you're either going to have 2 primaries and 2 secondaries facing forward, or 3 primaries facing forward against the rear wall of a cab. And it's kind of vague really about what the different requirements are between a primary and secondary. I had a vendor in this week, a seating manufacturer, and that actually came up in the discussion, the primary and secondary seats. And they were, interested in what our thoughts were about it and like what direction we were going. But we have a different seating configuration based on, our minimum staffing levels and, how we operate. But it'll have bigger impacts in the volunteer service. I can envision that there, somewhere where like you're located, in the amount of people you would get and have to fit inside a cab at different times. That could be problematic for you based on spacing and the size of the cab and the number of people that you want to be able to carry. So I think that's a big part of it.
I think it could also, I'm sorry, Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, basically, good. I was going to say the description that they give as far as primary and secondary goes is the primary seats, the driver and officer seats, and any additional seating positions designated by the purchaser used by firefighters wearing PPE when the apparatus is in regular service. So that would be any seats that regular firefighters are going to use. Secondary seats, any seating other than primary, not intended to be occupied as the vehicle is used in regular service, and not intended to be used by firefighters in PPE. So I don't know who's going to ride in those secondary seats, but in any case, Ed was right. The primaries, previously, all seats were just listed as 22 inches wide at the shoulders, which was pretty narrow. So in the last revision of the standard, in 2016, there was certain people who were involved with safety who had brought up that that firefighter study, but they brought it into the process too late. When the standard comes out, it's open to public comments. Once the comment period closes, you can't introduce more new material into it. So this was new material at the end of the standard revision, and they actually tried to stop the standard from being published and tried to get that in there, and they were told that it would be in this one, and it is. So previously it was 22 inches at the shoulder for all the seats. So you could have a 10-man cab where you have, 4 and 4 in the back plus the driver and officer. But now the primary seating is going to be 20.8 at the hips and 27.6 at the shoulders. You're not going to be able to do that in a cab that's DOT compliant, basically. It also says that the primary seat width is permitted to overlap the secondary seat. So I guess if it's Sunday morning and you're taking the rig out for a ride, everybody can sit in their seats. But if you're responding, then only the primary seats are supposed to be occupied by people wearing PPE when the apparatus is in service. And of course, the driver and officer seats have to, be this size. So they have to make sure that they fit in there as well.
One of the other things is, as you guys were talking about this, that people probably need to keep in mind is fire departments have gotten very creative inside the cab with other compartments inside with roll up doors that hold equipment, and a lot of times you'll have on the rear wall 2 of those compartments with 2 seats in between. Might have to change the size of those compartments a little bit in order to allow for the for the primary seating. So there's going to be things that are impacted with this as you move forward. You might have to change your thinking about the inside of the cab and how that's arranged, and certainly, of course, with how many people you're going to carry to the scene, but also just how you're going to arrange equipment and store equipment on the inside of that as well. I don't know if Ed, I don't know if any of DC's rigs do that. Bill, I'm sure with over the years with all the consulting that you've been doing, you've encountered departments that are doing that. And of course, I think one of the main things to remember here, and Bill, you just brought it up, is the definition of the primary seating versus the secondary seating, and the intent of both of them. One other thing that you guys brought up, some of the differences. I mean, besides the fact that it's a 375-page book now, was lighting, and lighting has been, another debatable topic, we'll say, over recent years. I always talk about the LaFrances that we used to have, and those were 2 very slow rotating beacons on the roof. Then we got the bar lights, and you could kind of adjust speeds depending on, what little electric motors you had in there. We all just about, I can't think of a rig that rolls off the line that doesn't have LED warning lights these days. Warning lights, scene lights. These are very bright and they're very, very convenient. They are not, they last a long time. I think that's mostly why people went with them, besides the fact that they do often provide more light. But, when you're coming around a curve.
And less.
What's that?
And at less amperage.
Yes.
And at less amperage. That's a big thing.
And so now you're not needing you're not needing to buy generators anymore unless you're going to have a cord reel or something like that, or like a light. You still need them for the light towers, I believe, just to compensate for the wiring that goes up there. But and you guys would know that better than I. When you are, and this is something that, one of our advisors, Carl Haddon, was writing about this years ago. When you're coming around a curve, and all of a sudden, you're faced with those, with those lights. The drivers are having trouble navigating that. Firefighters sometimes are they're walking back to get a piece of equipment, and they're kind of blinded by the light. Talk a little bit about what changes to lighting. It really hasn't been something where the change was you need to have this much or provide this number of warning lights or whatever at a minimum. It was more along the lines of what can you do with, at least as far as I know, what can you do with the lighting for those really dark times to help, it's all about firefighter safety in the end, but to prevent some of the accidents that we were seeing, and also to make it a little easier to navigate the scene by the firefighters. And I know that I just threw out a whole mouthful there, but Bill, I'll start with you. Could you talk a little bit about what about the lighting was debated?
Sure. So we've had a whole number of accidents lately with cars crashing into apparatus, especially at accident scenes, hitting firefighters, things like that. And a lot of people felt that it was due to the overwhelming amount of light output that we were doing, especially at night. So there were debates going on as far as requiring a third lighting mode that would dim the lights at night. And the lighting manufacturers, who are also represented on the committee or represented in the task groups, all of them couldn't agree as to who could provide that, who couldn't provide it, things like that. So what the standard says now is it allows a third, you have responding to the scene where there are light outputs at each of the 4 zones required, and then on scene and what the lighting is required as far as the minimum output. So what it says now is a third mode is permitted so long as it don't go less than the required amount. So the amounts have not changed that were originally designed, but it allows you to bring it down to that. And Ed and I were in Orlando in 2018. We witnessed a non-technical display, which NFPA don't allow demonstrations and stuff unless they're like scientific and so forth. But there's nothing to prevent the members from just taking a look. So one of the lighting manufacturers set up a mock-up of the back of an apparatus, and we went back a ways, and he said, okay, this is like the, 800,000 candle power that's required. And it was at night or in the evening at least. And they said, okay, this is what it looks like. And it says, okay, now this is what a typical apparatus today looks like. And they put on all the lights, and it was like, wow, it was like, looking into the sun. And it's true. I've gone to a million pre-construction conferences, and the 2 hottest subjects are warning lights and sirens and graphics. Never mind the pump, the hose bed, stuff like that. But warning lights and graphics are the 2 big things. So the warning lights can be brought down to the standard at night if that's what you want. Some manufacturers actually have it where a sensor can be incorporated that does that automatically. And other than that, you could put a switch in there that allows you to do that as well. Go ahead, Ed. You got anything to add to that?
We already started using the sensor that Bill was referring to. It's basically nothing more than a photocell, and we've installed it on the driver's A post towards the bottom, and it picks up the lighting, outdoor lighting, depending on whether it's daytime, dusk, or nighttime. But it's activated through the parking brake is how it becomes active. So you're still in that responding or on scene mode, and then that third option comes in when the parking brake is set. So if it's daylight, their lights are going to be brighter, and if it's at nighttime, it dims the lights down, so it's really not obtrusive to anything approaching from the rear. And it almost seemed, and you could ask people at different manufacturers. One of the larger ones had a big repair facility for bodywork, and some of the people there just always thought in the back of their mind that when you saw the chevron striping, it seemed like when that went into effect, there were more rear end accidents. And I just know from my own personal perspective of riding in a battalion chief's buggy, and you were always following the apparatus down the street, and with the bright lights and the chevron striping, and then headlights hitting the chevron striping, you kind of had like somewhat of a washout effect. And I think, Bill, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but originally when the chevron striping first came out and there wasn't regulated, it was in a V pattern towards the center instead of a V pattern towards the outboard edges. And they claimed that that was originally drawing vehicles in towards the middle. And then they switched to that outboard V. But it was very apparent to me following all the time that you were getting, hit with these surface mounted directional flashing lights. And then, there was headlights on the back of the chevron striping, and it would really bother your eyes a little bit. And we had kind of reduced some of the lighting on the back over that. And on the light bars, we had switched to the rotating LEDs. Two of the larger manufacturers, they have a little bit different versions of it. One of them, it's stationary and the pattern rotates, and the other one uses some magnets to rotate a device. But when you look at them at nighttime, and Bill and I had talked about this many times off to the side, and I'd send him some videos here and there, and we both did some comparisons. And the rotation lights, LEDs on the front and the light bars and whatnot, definitely had a different impact than if you were comparing it to, the directional LED lights. It was pretty powerful, the directional ones. And so that DVI system that I referenced earlier, it dims down the lights based on outdoor lighting when you're on the scene and the parking brake's engaged. So I think that's going to have a huge impact on the rear end accidents when it comes down. I mean, we've had apparatus rear-ended here in DC on the highway and whatnot, and on regular streets while on the scene of accidents and whatnot. And the damage that's done to the fire truck too is a big issue. Fortunately, we haven't had any members injured, but we just suffered damage to the vehicles.
Ed was right. The original chevron striping was not basically regulated, so people put it any way they wanted. But if you look at, you go down any highway and you run up to a bridge abutment, you'll see that the stripes, the black and yellow stripes, always flag you away from the object. So that was the idea of the inverted V, was to flag people away from the rear of the rig. A couple other just brief changes to the lighting standard was the flash rate changed. Originally, we were 75 to 150 flashes per minute on a light, and that was brought down to 60. It's actually 60 to 240. I don't know why the high end, but 60 was SAE, I think, changed their minimum flash rate to 60. So a little slower light is a little less likely to be confusing. Another thing was the first time in the standard, a green light is allowed. It can be, if you think you're Chicago Fire or whatever, and you want to have a green light on your rig, you can have it. It's just that green light is not counted in the zone totals when the apparatus is calculated. The other thing that was important was initially when the warning lights went into 4 zones, A, B, C, and D. A is front, B is the right side, C is the rear, and D is the left side. When we did that, they just took the apparatus and put an X through it. So now when you got that, typically the front bumper end caps and so forth would technically in the A zone, even though they face the sides. Now it's the X has been cut down to cut through the corners of the apparatus, so that A zone is definitely front-facing lights and so forth. And one other quick thing was degradation of scene lights. Apparently, some people using some cheap scene lights, maybe made overseas or what have you, that when they were on for a while, they dimmed down. They almost lost their output. So now there's, I think it's 25%, can't be greater than 25%. And there's a bunch of other requirements for the scene lights as far as heating of the outside and handles and things like that.
I think, Bill, you can correct me on this one if I'm wrong, but there's some flexibility now to use, you weren't locked into just one manufacturer as far as the lighting goes. And there was this weird thing about the, and say an electronic siren. So if you had a federal siren and you wanted a speaker embedded in the front bumper, and the best fit was a Wildland siren or vice versa, Wildland and federal, you couldn't, you would lose an NFPA 1901 certification, or now the 1900, if they followed through with that, because that speaker was not made by the same people that made the siren and vice versa. And now with the lighting also, that siren problem goes away. And, if you wanted, brand A for light bars and brand B for surface mounted warning lights, you're allowed to do that too. You weren't just locked into all the lights had to be from the same vendor.
So I wanted to take the state. I mean, we've gotten kind of granular with some of the changes, and I'm sure we'll probably get into some other ones, and just to dig a little deeper in December. But right now, taken as a whole, NFPA 1900, what are some of the impacts, if any, fire departments will experience in writing their specifications? So, because of the changes, because of all the combinations, what are some of the, as they go to write a spec for a new truck, are there going to be any significant changes that they need to be aware of in terms of what they're putting in that spec? Bill, I'll start with you on that one.
Well, it's going to be basically the same as they've done before.
Okay.
We've discussed some of the things that where you can make changes, like with the lighting and so forth. A couple of other things that were put in there. There's differences between electric vehicles and internal combustion engine vehicles. So in some places in the standard, you're going to see EV, and other places IC. So whether it's internal combustion or electric vehicles, the electric vehicles are going to have cut loops and be identified on all sides as being electric vehicles and so forth like that. As far as people writing specs, now, we all know how this goes. You get with a salesman, and the salesman, you tell him what you want, and the salesman puts this stuff together. The manufacturers are keenly aware of what's in the standard. The standard is not earth-shatteringly different. Like I said, it seems like it almost opened up and gave the purchaser more flexibility. Like, for instance, with the equipment. In other words, like, for instance, it don't mention pre-connected hose lines anymore. The the cubic feet of space that originally was required for pre-connected lines is now incorporated in the overall hose bed space. So nobody's going to tell you you must have cross lays or you must have pre-connects. New York City don't use any pre-connected lines other than a bumper line. A lot of places do, take hose off the back as much as they need and break it, and that's how they do it. Basically, in Jersey City, it was kind of rare that we used a cross lay. And in most cases, you want to come off the back and have enough hose to make the attack. So, things like that, things like the equipment being whatever you want. So if you want, you can definitely call for all the equipment you want. You can call for, the weight of the equipment stayed the same, how much you have to allow on each apparatus. If you have heavier ones, you can put that in there, things like that. Also, something else that I just happened looking through my notes here. One of the things that has always been a problem was operator manuals. Typically, you get this big cardboard box with 10,000 manuals and instructions and installation things, and they throw it, the guy says, well, here's your manuals, and they throw it in a compartment, and they typically wind up in the chief's office or somewhere like that where nobody gets to see them. So now the manuals have to either be on the apparatus, stored in a protected area, or available to be viewed by electronic display on the apparatus. Like you'll see a lot of the apparatus have an electronic display where you would have to go to a menu and pull up the apparatus manual, and or available by internet link. So the manuals have to be available basically, so that the guy who's doing it can look at it and see what he's doing. The other thing was, in the cab, the listing of what oil the truck takes and all that. Well, that thing really got out of hand. It was like 2 pages long, stuck to the thing in like number 4 print, and it had everything from the oil that goes in the air conditioning system down to the rear axles and everything else. So that has been revised and reduced so that only the important things are on there that the operator needs to know, like engine oil and coolant and things like that. So, and tire pressures. So it's a lot of stuff has been left out. A lot of stuff has been taken out because it's required, and it's been cleaned up, and repetition has been taken out. Let me put it at that.
Okay. Ed, how about you?
So, I mean, I agree with everything that Bill was just talking about. It's going to be interesting for people at first, like when they're trying to review the document and figure it out. They're going to find out that it's kind of went a little bit back towards being a minimum standard, which is going to allow them a little bit more flexibility to do what their operational needs are. The equipment, it was kind of, I always thought that was a little puzzling myself because, the area that you're in, Chris, you're going to equip your apparatus differently to suit your operational needs. Cities typically are going to operate in large urban departments. They're going to operate, engine companies and ladder companies or truck companies, depending on the, what they call them, but, or a rescue company. And they're going to equip them according to the, how they operate. So it just, going back to, being a minimum standard more so than a maximum standard. Which is a good thing, I think. When they were reviewing the document, like I said, there's some headings at the top of the pages, particularly like when you're in the 1901 and 1906 areas, that that you might find a little confusing if you're just checking the top of the page for a heading without knowing exactly where you are and what chapters you're in, which will be a little bit confusing at first, but eventually people will get the hang of it. And then, of course, it's a big change from what everybody was used to. All the documents were in their own separate manual. The ARF section is a very small section of this document now. So it's like 3 chapters, I think, 4, 5, and 6. So, that the ARF guys might be a little bit like, I got 375 pages, but I only need, 60 pages of it, So with change always comes complaints, and, that'll go away in due time. And Bill probably, I guess, years ago, a lot of standards were combined and then they separated them, and now it's going back towards combination again. So I just think the biggest deal for people is going to be, they're going to look at that thick, inch and a half thick book for 1900, be scared by it. But a lot of the information is essentially the same, and it's really, 4 manuals condensed into one. So in time, some of the struggles will go away. One thing that I think it's going to be an impact is these EPA engine regulation changes that are coming. We talked about seating earlier and cab dimensions, interiors, and whatnot. And so with those EPA requirement changes and engine changes, always has an impact on the engine tunnels as far as the charge air requirements and cooling requirements and so on and so forth. So some of the seating might have to be reviewed again after there's engine tunnel impacts with the coming EPA changes, which they're due to go in effect in 2027. But I believe Cummins, who's the major engine manufacturer now, the predominant one, they're going to start launching their motor in 2026, I believe it is. So, stand by. The things we talked about with seating could rapidly be changing, based on delivery times too. If you ordered a piece of apparatus, before January 1st or slightly after January 1st, whatever that case may be. So some of the things in this document could be impacted by those EPA changes very easily, which I think will probably present a challenge in due time, but hopefully it doesn't.
Well, before I ask for just general comments or general takeaways you'd like the audience to walk away with, I did want to real quick touch on what is the current revision cycle for this now, and B, you two are on the committee. How can firefighters, fire department representatives get involved with the process? We mentioned in the beginning, when the revision cycle came around, the committee has to review hundreds, maybe thousands of comments that come in regarding the standard. They're coming in from all over, not just manufacturers, not just firefighters, and not just other industry experts. But how can we get involved with that process that you're involved with? Like I said, you're both committee members. How can I submit my comments for the next revision, and when can I expect the next revision to come out, Bill?
Typically the standards are revised every 5 years, sometimes before if it's necessary. As soon as the standard comes out, it's open to public comment. So that's done online. It used to be a paper form. You had to rip out of the back of the book and fill out and send it in. And in there, basically it asks you what paragraph you're looking at, what change you want, and basically why. And as you said, as the apparatus committee, we had more than 1,000 public comments. And when the revision was done, we addressed them in Orlando in 2018. When this revision thing was done, COVID kicked in, and we had to have Zoom meetings for 4 weeks, 3 or 4 days a week. We were on Zoom for hours going through these public comments, and all of the comments had to be addressed again a second time. So it wasn't only the ones we addressed in Orlando, but anything that came in after that. So people can get involved, read the standard. If you really have a problem with something, it has to be justified. It can't just be, I don't like green lights or what have you. It has to be justification. And every comment is addressed. Sometimes they're grouped together because you'll have maybe 10 comments about the same thing. So they'll all be grouped together. The apparatus committee will address it and say, we reject it, or, it's a good idea, but we only want to use part of it, and so forth. And then they'll let the person know. And then when it's open for the second round of comments, the second round of comments cannot contain new material, but it can be a comment on the committee's decision, for instance. So, and then once all that's worked out, then it goes to the committee, votes on it, and it moves on. So it's a pretty involved process. It's not, nothing's taken lightly, believe me. One other thing, Chris, that we forgot to talk about, and I'll get to it after Ed makes his comments about the adjustment, and that's the vehicle data recorder and things like that were removed. Ed, you have something else to say about the revision process?
Sure. One of the key things, if somebody was really interested in it, and for them to do, would be find out when one of the meetings are and where it's going to be located. And visitors are allowed in the meetings. They just aren't allowed to participate in the big meeting. With all the committee split into principals and alternates. The principals are voting, and the alternates, everybody has an alternate. And if the principal can't vote or can't make it, the alternate is allowed to speak. So they can attend the meetings and they can participate in the task groups. So when we have the meetings, there's breakout meetings, which are called task groups, and anybody can go to those task groups sessions, and they can participate and raise questions, start discussions, and so on and so forth, and participate basically with that meeting and be part of it. And that's probably the best way to do it. That was kind of how I did it. Attended some meetings and went to the task group sessions, became an alternate, and then became a principal. But you'll get a flavor for what goes on through the task group meetings, and then you'll really be able to determine whether it's something you want to pursue or you don't want to pursue. And the committee is split up between end users, like subject matter experts, manufacturers, and then there's some from insurance, I think, is the other category. So there's a couple little sections of how people fit in to the committee itself. When this 1900 was put together, though, the individual committees still maintained their individual groups, like 1901, 1906. That committee was lumped together, and that's who did that portion. The 414 did the ARF, and the 1917 did the ambulances. So you're still part of the committee that you were originally on. You're not part of everything that's in 1900 unless you were on all four, standards. So, but I would suggest if you're really interested, look at the NFPA documents online and the NFPA website. If you have comments that you want to make after you've read it, submit your comments. And then when the meetings happen, attend the meeting, see what goes on. If you're interested or not interested, you'll know pretty quickly.
I agree with Ed. That's how I started as well, was when I was promoted to apparatus chief in Jersey City. I was getting all these NFPA things, and I'm reading them, and I'm thinking, geez, I had suggestions, because I was a truck mechanic for 15 years as well on the side. So I started attending the meetings just as an observer, and then I was brought into the conversations and so forth. The next thing, I was an alternate and then a principal. And I just got my 25-year pin, which I didn't even know existed. But 25 years I've been serving on the apparatus committee. So I may be one of the oldest ones there, or longest serving ones there. Old indeed. Whatever.
Well, Bill, you had a couple of other comments you wanted to make on the VDR.
Right. Okay. So as I said, some of the things that were cleaned up in there was it was added that the purchasers to identify any onboard data management and communications equipment. So that would be radios, antennas, MDTs, digital alert warning systems, and so forth. Originally, several years ago, a vehicle data recorder was required. And the theory was that it was going to constantly monitor the apparatus speed and all the rest of this stuff, and that the chief was going to be able to review it and, safely, bring people under control and so forth. And it turned out that none of that happened. It was very rare that the vehicle data recorder was used, except a lot of times defense attorneys would subpoena that information if the apparatus was involved in an accident. Also, most of the manufacturers, as far as the engine manufacturers and so forth, have a lot of this data on the engine computers and so forth. So it was felt that it was unnecessary to have to put that on the rig, so it was removed. The other thing that was it was pushed pretty hard was the digital alert warning system that some people have in their cars and so forth. That's going to be optional. If you want it, you spec it, and it can be put in there. Perhaps in the next go round, if it gets to be more mainstream, maybe it'll be required. The other thing now is a backup camera is no longer optional; it's required. I think it might have been required on all cars or something from now on, or from some date. So it was pointed out that, why not on a fire apparatus? So, if you're going to be getting a rig, it's going to have a backup camera on it. Other than that, like I said, we covered most of the stuff, and surprisingly, as Ed said, a lot of it is because the apparatus standard is a minimum standard. So there is nothing that prevents an end user from specifying anything more than is in the standard. The standard is not going to prevent you from getting anything. It's just going to be the minimums. So, as far as equipment goes, like Ed said, rural areas are going to have different equipment requirements than cities, things like that. So it's going to be up to you how, what equipment you have. The thing that I said is I don't know how that's going to affect with the ISO, because in there I think they say equipment according to NFPA. So I guess you don't have to have any equipment if it's going to be an ISO requirement. But that'll be worked out, I'm sure.
Ed, any other final comments?
No, I think, we covered pretty much everything. One other thing people are going to have to watch out for, the only comment I'll add, is the 1911 and 1912 standards for testing and refurbishment, retirement, and whatnot. That also got consolidated into 1910. So just as a point of interest for anybody, if they're, as far as that, the annual testing goes for pumps and aerial devices and vehicle inspections, so on and so forth there, that's all going to be in the new 1910, which also is a January 1st, 2024.
Okay. Well, again, go ahead.
One other quick thing, Chris. If anybody, people who get fire engineering, I did the apparatus supplement in August that covers all of these changes, paragraph by paragraph. I went through it and compared it. It took a lot of work, but all of the changes are in there. The one thing I found was inadvertently left out was the aerial tip loading that was required in the standards. So they put out an errata, they call it, which is an editorial correction. It was the whole paragraph on aerial tip loading and how it's rated and so forth was accidentally left out in the combination. So anybody who gets a new 1900 will also get the errata indicating that was accidentally left out, and here's what it's supposed to say and where it's supposed to go. But other than that, it was a lot of work, and I'm happy to serve on the committee, as I know Ed is. We always have a good time together. Anyway, Chris, back to you.
Perfect, guys. Again, my thanks to you for taking some time out to talk with me today. We are going to have a part 2 where we probably will get a little more granular with things. We want to answer your questions. If you have clarifications you need made about anything we discussed today, please let us know. If you've looked at the standard and you've got some questions, we got 2 of the committee members right here who hopefully can answer those questions. You can send them to me at chris.mcloone, MCLOONE, at Clarion Events, CLARION events.com. So again, my thanks to both of you for sitting down with me today. Part 2 is going to be coming in December. In the meantime, have a good one and stay safe.